Teams or Zoom or other things like that. Okay, well, welcome. There's a lot of stuff here. This is our second field trip of the month. June is field trip month for the Science Circle, and same thing in December before we've got our summer coming up. Quite a group here. Welcome. So let's pretend that we're back on the island of Mauritius. Anybody happen to know where Mauritius is? I suspect there are people, and I always like to ask questions to see. Oh, Merrill, of course. Yes. Okay. Where can you say approximately where it is? I mean, on Earth here. It's not on the moon. We've been having the last field trip was on the moon. Well, yeah, everything's political. But in that case, I think we can. It's okay. Anybody happen? Yeah. Okay. East off of Africa. It's near Madagascar, the biggest island there. And you can find it. Eat Africa. Actually, I have. I've been in Africa before, and there's all kinds of good stuff to eat there. A little different than here. Yeah, bad time. Okay, so anyway, so welcome. Now, one of the reasons that I created this display, there's several reasons. One is, you see the big ship over there? Is anyone being in Second Life long enough to have seen that ship somewhere else? In Second Life.
Is that the Beagle?
Hang on a second. Let me put my voice up a little bit more. Okay, so what did somebody say? I'm sorry.
I said, is that the Beagle?
That is the Beagle. That is the HMS Beagle. It's got a nice, at last glance, nobody, it does have a flag on there, and it happens to be a British flag, and that is the Beagle. Okay, now, long ago, in Second Life, there was a continent called the Skylands. And on the Skylands were lots and lots. In fact, actually, if you look around you at the islands there are around you, what you see is the residual islands that did not sink into the Linden Sea. Essentially, the Skylands as it was long ago, with most of the islands missing. And that actually constitutes part of, well, exactly. Genome was one of the islands. There were several others, and that's what you see. The ones that did not sink, essentially, are still here around us. Okay, so there was an island that was hosted by the group that hosts Nature magazine, which of course is one of the predominant worldwide respected magazines of science. And they had several islands called the Aleutian Islands, and that ship over there was on one of them. They had a grand interactive tour of Darwin's voyages and that ship. And I said, can I have it? Knowing when that they were going to go away before the island. Yeah, it was. And and they said, yes, you can have that. You can have, there was an enormous big Herschel telescope, several other things which I have in my inventory. And so I res that there, and it now is a prominent fixture in the Cove in the Science Circle region. And then built, yeah, thank you, and then built displays around it. I've got some other ones. The Herschel telescope is really big. It would take up a good part of this area and lots of sim prints. I haven't done that. Okay, so anyway, there are a couple things. You can see the map up here. One of the things, okay, when I talk about Darwin, if I just say Darwin, what do you think of? And this is part of the reason I did this field trip, and evolution. Well, the interesting thing was Darwin and the Voyage of the Beagle. Okay, the interesting thing was evolution, the way that we know it, was not what Darwin was known for until later in life. Yeah, okay, several things. Okay, so in other words, in science, we tend to simplify things really a lot and then not take a look at the content. So real quick before we do the field trip or the physical field trip, let me give you some context. Charles Darwin, his father and his grandfather were both doctors. He was well-to-do. He got to go anywhere he wanted. He went to Cambridge first to become a minister. He interpreted the Bible literally, including at the beginning of the second voyage. His father and grandfather were both abolitionists, but they were also what are called free thinkers. That is, they did not believe that you needed to have churches or church doctrine to have a ethical or moral foundation. And they were also, like I said, abolitionists and stuff. Now, his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, actually was a poet in parts, like lots of naturalists. Darwin was a naturalist at the time, and just like David Thoreau and other people, wrote poetry. And his poetry included verses about evolution. At that point, evolution meant that things had, in other words, there's so many different things that are different species that essentially they had evolved from, say, the time of Garden of Eden or original creation. That was essentially what evolution meant back at that time. So Erasmus Darwin, his grandfather, wrote about evolution in a poem 20 years before he was even born. Okay. Did I already mention, let's see, what I may not have mentioned, but I need to mention now, is there's so much stuff going on in the world, and if I haven't said it, then let me just go ahead and say it, is there's so much going on in the world that please, let's pretend we're back in 1830s, Darwin Day, no talk of politics today, no names except for back in that time, et cetera, okay. Or about, in other words, things germane to this subject. Now, so Darwin, the other thing is what places in the world. So Darwin, what he did was he had several people that he knew, and one was a guy named Lyell. I'm trying to look for his name, but he was a geologist, and he was young Darwin, his 20s there, was very impressed by Charles Lyell. Does anyone know him as far as science goes? He's actually a big name in one field of science. I'll write it in here. Okay. That's why I asked. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely, geology. He was a Scotsman, and he noticed Scotland is a wonderful place to start to look at geology, because essentially the mountains there and such are actually part of the old, they were once connected to the Appalachian Mountains on the North American continent back before the Atlantic Ocean. And you see and also parts of Scandinavian stuff. So he was looking, and he saw lots of, fossils up in the hills, and he knew of volcanoes and stuff, and he was saying, the predominant theory back then was called, and this is germane to what we're doing today, so I need to give you a little background. Catastrophe theory. Anyone know about catastrophe theory? In other words, if you're going to study evolution, it's important to understand some of the background. Okay, catastrophe theory. I actually took a class on it once, just because some people actually still think about it, just to see what the other side, that sort of thing. But what that was thought was essentially that everything was, yes, exactly, Sumo. It was basically the theory that everything was created all at once. All of the layers that you see and all of that was created during the flood, essentially, and during catastrophic events rather than gradual changes. A lot of people, if you'd asked them in Darwin's day how old the Earth was, they would probably say 10,000 years old, which was the approved amount of time at that point. It was only people like Charles Lyell and stuff that said, if this happened gradually, it would have happened over millions of years, not. And no one would have believed billions of years, that sort of thing. So, okay. So anyway, that was the thinking of the time period of Darwin. So Darwin went on his trip, and Charles Lyell was the one who helped him. He wrote a letter to the captain going, hey, I've got this young man. Hi, Illing. We've got this young man, and he's really bright, and he's interested. And so why don't you take him as a traveling companion with you on this in this old ship called the Beagle, and go see. Does anyone know what the voyage, in fact, actually, I'm starting to get into the field trip. So let me just show you what's in front of you here, and then we'll go on the field trip. As you can see where the island of Mauritius is here, it's right to the east of Madagascar, which is the big island on the southeast coast of Africa. You can see some of the pictures here behind Mike of what it looks like. You can see that long voyage. I'm not sure they really planned a 5-year voyage around the world at that time, but this is where they went. One of the places we know well, which starts with a G. In other words, when we think of, well, that was part of it. The Galapagos, very good, Sumo. Well, you know that you're stuck on this thing. Seek out new life, new civilizations, boldly go where no one's gone before. Oh, oops, I guess that wasn't Darwin. Okay, so, but part of what they were tasked to do was some mundane stuff. They were supposed to measure the areas around coves and things where they were. Remember, this was back before at least for Europeans, back before the heart of Africa was known. It was back before, just after, not that long after Australia was discovered. No one knew much about Antarctica. There were still lots of places that Europeans didn't know about, or know about well. And so they were tasked with some navigation, go boldly. They were tasked to test a chronometer that had been invented in the 1700s. Does anyone know why a chronometer is important on a ship? I spent 8 years of my life on this. Oh, wow. There you go. Max got it ahead of time. Yes. In fact, there was a prize. There was a prize for someone who could invent a chronometer that did not, that could accurately tell time on a ship that was pitching and rolling. Harrison, exactly. That was the person who got the prize. And it was a big engineering feat, actually, to build a chronometer that could go on a ship that was pitching and rolling in the seas, and to test for longitude. Latitude's easy. All you got to do is look at the stars. Anyone could do latitude. I could show you how to do latitude. Easy. But longitude, that was far more difficult to tell where you were around the world. Okay, so that was one of the things. They were also tasked with looking at all of the species that they had along the way. They already knew from earlier voyages that there were all kinds of cool fossils and species and all that they had found. And so that was part of their mission. So if you look up at the map here near Mike, right above Mike, you'll see that they went to a lot of different places on Earth, all the way around. It took about 5 years to go around the world there. Galapagos was just one of them. And then Mauritius looks like about a little over halfway through there. And it was at these different places that Darwin came up with the idea that of what's called natural selection. In other words, by looking at all the fossils and stuff. Now, natural selection was something that was kind of new. Does anyone happen to know who else came up with the idea of natural selection at the same time as Darwin? Oh, wow. Okay, that was like click. Max. Of course, Max is, if everyone happens to know, a geneticist. So she would know this stuff by heart. So, okay, let's keep going on the thing. By where Chantal is, there are two animals. Both of them are unfortunately extinct. What is the most famous extinct resident of the Mauritius? Happens to be in a cage right here. The dodo bird, yes. In other words, if you've never heard of the Mauritius, virtually everybody on Earth has probably heard of the dodo bird. And so the dodo was, the Mauritius was discovered by, now of course these islands were not discovered. In other words, there were people on them for a long time, but it was discovered as far as European discovery by Dutch sailors, of course, who went all over the world. In the 1600s, long before Darwin came there. And unfortunately, both this tortoise, no more than you would blame me for things that happened in the 1700s in North America or with my ancestors. Not necessarily the Dutch. The Dutch simply discovered the islands. There was a lot of people that I know. So there were a lot of people that ate dodo birds. Dodo birds didn't have a lot of protection. They only had one egg a year. They couldn't fly. They were essentially just sitting targets for people who needed meat. Same thing with the tortoise. So both the tortoise here and the dodo went extinct before Darwin. And there was actually a large zoological park. It's the oldest zoological park and refuge in the southern hemisphere that happens to be on the island of Mauritius. See, you're already learning stuff you probably didn't know, right? Okay, so the message here was about ecology and about the idea that on tiny little islands like this, that it's very easy to disturb what's on them and wipe out species and all that. They also introduced species from Africa like monkeys and others. So there's a lot of invasive species, not to mention people, which is, invasive species. Okay, so now let's proceed to the display. What I'm going to do is walk straight down to the ramp of the HMS Beagle. This is 1830s, and so take a look. Okay, I will tell you one other thing, and then we'll get going, is that a lot of the signs, including the map under Mike, once you walk past it, you will not see the sign, because in the miracle of Second Life building, you can put a texture on one side. So a lot of the signs you do not see right now. You can only see one part of them, and then if you walk to another side, you'll see another part of them. And that's how you keep this area simple, by not seeing half of the sign, so to speak, unless you're looking at them. So look around you. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, this is, if you're within, okay, let me write it down here. Oh, thank you, Chantal. Okay, if you, I don't know whether we have a chat extender, but if you are within 30 meters, you should hear me. Okay, good. So everybody can hear no matter where they are, including Mike over. Because if we had this many people on the wharf, we'd probably be weighing it down a little bit. Okay. By the way, you can go in the ship. It's not too terribly exciting. There's really nothing there. There's some cannons. There's a map of the Beagle. in Tierra del Fuego area. There's a map of what was in the real Beagle, and there are cannons that shoot off all the time toward the lighthouse. It was just part of, I haven't changed that since the time that it was a Nature Island area. And then Mike is flying, which may be the best way to do this, because the next thing I'd like you to do is to go over to near, see that big red tree over there? If we could kind of go over that area, that's the next place that but go ahead and take a look here. You've got, this is the book on the voyage of the Beagle. There are posters behind where Sairi and Sumo are that talk about the Beagle itself and the voyage and young Darwin and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to go up and over here. Okay. Okay, there we go. And we've got two people. You can join me over here. Yeah, you can walk back over here. You can swim, fly, whatever works for you. It's okay. Join me over here. Somebody went in the ocean. Must have lost their wings. There we go. Okay, same thing with Mike. Okay. Here again, what is the purpose of field trips? The purpose of and classes. I used to tell my students, you know, we're only here for an hour, and yet the subject that I'm talking to you about is something that you could spend months or years on. So from my standpoint as a teacher, field trips and classes are only an introduction to a subject which you might not know. And so consider this field trip to an introduction to this area even. There's so much that's in this area. You can go back and take a look at the posters. You can walk underwater, which we will do. Now, behind Redrum over here, what do you see that you can't see on the other side? We've got the Descent of Man and the Origin of Species and stuff, which are books that Darwin wrote later in his life. Oh, okay. By the way, it was Charles Lyell. Somebody talked about Wallace. Wallace actually approached Darwin after Darwin started writing about natural selection and all that and evolution. And he says, you know, Alfred Russel Wallace. And he said, you know, I've been talking about the same thing, and I've got some writings. And so Charles Lyell actually was the one that arranged for Charles Darwin and for Alfred Russel Wallace to publish in the exact year on the same topic, so that Darwin or Wallace could not, you know, take individual. They basically worked together and said, okay, we'll publish about this weird thing called natural selection together, so it becomes even more impactful on the scientific world. So I thought that was quite a collaboration. Oh, the birds? Yeah, they are. Somebody did a good job. Okay, so where you are now, you're all on different sides of these posters, but some of the posters has, okay, what is one of the arguments against evolution? In other words, for people that are against evolution, not natural selection, evolution. What is one of the arguments that people use against evolution? Well, let's say they are rational. In other words, okay. In other words, they're quoting authorities. But what about if you get beyond the authority? If you look at rational arguments, not just authoritative literature, but rational arguments for why evolution can't be. I'll give you a hint. It's right here in front of me. Now, unfortunately, Jillian cannot see it because, like I said, the posters here you can only see from one side. All of these posters have two sides, and from one side you cannot see them. That way, it's less intrusive on the whole area here. Okay, it's a great feature in Second Life that you can do that. Well, okay, mutations, etc. Well, one of the things was, yeah, okay, now the person who's getting closest there is Mike about the missing link. They basically said, look at the eyeball. Look at how sophisticated our eyes are. Look at the ear. Look at some of those things. They said, you can't possibly tell me that that simply random genetic mutations could have formed an eyeball that is so detailed, perfect, sophisticated, and stuff like that. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so this poster right here actually shows you how the eyeball evolved. Now, what I mean is, okay, how about if I pick on Max here for a second? She is a geneticist. She teaches graduate genetics. So when I say the eyeball has evolved, what do I really mean? Could you explain that, Max? I mean, I have my own explanation, but in other words, an eyeball does not evolve. But what happens? I'm putting you on the spot. You can either talk or chat.
What's the question again?
Well, in other words, if I say the eyeball evolved, I do not mean that my eyeball evolved. What do we mean by evolution? In other words, when we say how the eye evolved, that's one of the and birds' wings and all that.
You're talking about response to light at various wavelengths, right? So you can find that in simple organisms like Euglena, for example, has a nice little eye spot. Other organisms also have these little light sensors. There's a lot of simpler light sensors than the human eye. In fact, we don't have the best possible design. Our eyes are kind of inside out. The eye, when it's developing, goes straight out from the brain. You might be able to see it in that picture. So it's really part of the brain. But the octopus eye develops sort of right side up. So we have the optic nerve growing out from the retina at the back of the eye and then back through the back of the eye and into the brain, which is why we have the big blind spot that we do. Octopuses don't have that. So there's a lot of variations on light sensors in different organisms. I don't know if that's where you're going.
No, that's it. And plus, I'd add what Illing has there. In other words, what happened was the human eye did not evolve from, like what Illing was saying. Okay, the story begins with light-sensitive proteins like opsins, like rhodopsin. We have several of them in our eye that are photosensitive. That then, once they pick up a wave of light at a certain wavelength, then it will send a signal to the optic nerve, etc. That sort of thing. Those were from long ago. And so what you can find is you can find examples in animals from which we have evolved over the years of eyes that start out like on that poster where you've got simply a nerve fiber and then a photoreceptor there to having a depressed area. In other words, so that they could at least tell what direction light was coming from. You can find that in very simple. I think Max may have mentioned euglenas, or what are those tiny little things that look like they have eyeballs that you cut up? Planaria worms in biology, to having a cavity where you essentially like a pinhole camera. In other words, you can trace the entire
And
evolution of...
have them out on the ends of each arm.
Yeah, yes, at the end of the arm. By the way, does anyone see ants crawling over you?
I do. I was trying to decide if it was on my screen or not. I finally watched
Okay, well, Yeah, I'll explain that in a minute. It's very funny. Yeah, you're standing in them because you have. I'll explain what that means in anyway. But anyway, there's two posters here that talk about how the eye evolved, and then also what the fetuses look like for different animals. And at the very beginning, if you look at what they look like back in the, this is from a very old poster, but if you look at what they look like in the early days, you cannot tell a human apart from a pig or a rabbit. It's only, and then even as they evolve a little bit, you start to see some features which change, and it's only until they're rather well advanced that you can tell a pig from a rabbit as far as the fetuses go. So there's lots of common things. Now, what I'm going to do is walk around here. You don't have to look at them all today, but you can know that this all exists and come back. So I start out with human human evolution. There's a colorful one right here on human evolution. I'm doing standing here. You can either use your camera or come by sometime. Stephen's looking at them now. And then there's what are called human haplogroups. Max, can I now? Sumo, do you know about haplogroups, or does anyone else know about haplogroups? I'm just picking on Max because I know she knows. And I'll tell you about ants in a minute. What are haplogroups, or does anyone know what human haplogroups are?
Mitochondrial um, mitochondrial groups. Is it
Yeah.
mitochondrial groups?
Yes, or haplotypes. Yeah, haplogroups, haplotypes. Haplotypes are in haplogroups and stuff. But anyway, if you give your, where the cat, okay, if you give your blood to one of these, I did it for National Geographic, for example. And I gave a blood sample, and they said, oh, if you look at the mutations in your blood, and you look at both the, now when you look at mitochondria, you're talking about, okay, correct me, Max, which one's women? In other words, female line versus male line. One is
Female line for mitochondria, males for the Y chromosome.
yeah, there we go. Okay. So, in other words, they look at the mutations and they go, okay, based on the mutations in your blood sample, or saliva sample, one blood sample, saliva sample, okay. Based on the mutations in your DNA, we can tell that your ancestors back at certain times had, in other words, when they knew that these mutations occurred, started out in Africa, like we all did, and then went into the Mideast, went up into, in my case, into the area where the Denisovans are, in other words, up in that area where Neanderthals and Denisovans and early humans mixed, and then over to Europe, and then down to southern Europe and into the UK area. And then they said, look at this one. This is a very specific mutation for two families in southern Scotland, northern England. This was on my both sides, and they say these are the two families. So they dated it back to like 700 AD, and so I can definitely pinpoint those sorts of things. Oh yeah, okay. So anyway, that's how you can kind of tell how your people that you're involved in evolve. Okay, so now. Like I said, evolution is not Darwin's theory. Sometimes I've seen these little fishes that say Darwin, yeah, but it's not. That's not Darwin's theory because Darwin didn't know that much about this. He suggested the idea of natural selection. Today, though, where Chantal is standing, that is more like this taxonomy of life is much, much more rich than we knew back then. Now, on the other side here, then what I do is I take, and I'm watching the time because I want to take a trip underwater here. If you look back at the very beginnings of, and you're going to have to be on this side, so if you could, back where Max is, if you can stand back like over here or near the signs, otherwise you're not going to see them. Remember that you can only see one half of the signs. You can, in other words, all of this side is different than on that side. It's not okay. So Jude, if you don't mind, if you'll come over here, or Mike, you can see everything over this side, or use your camera. That's fine. Dolly or Illing, in other words, you can't see what I'm talking about. So anyway, long time ago, you've got 520 million years ago, you've essentially got the first of the vertebrates. In fact, even before that, about 1 billion years, you've got the holozoa. The holozoans are animals, single-celled relatives, like the ones we were talking about earlier, and it goes, you are here, and you can see how other groups diverge from that. 760 years ago, you've got animals starting, and so forth as you work through here. So each one of these groups shows how... Now, by the way, one of the weird things about evolution is you can't say that humans are the pinnacle of evolution. We just happen to be one branch. There are lots of animals and plants that have way more advantages, more genes, more sophistication than we do. We just happen to think that we're the end-all of whatever evolution. But in any case, if you follow us through, 300 million years ago, you've got the animals which then had limbs that were underneath them, more symmetrical, parallel rather than reptiles and amphibians. Those were called the therapsids, and we happen to be them. Otherwise, we'd be walking around like a alligator. Okay, and then you had mammalia back in 165 million years ago, the first group of that. Now, by the way, the reason why I put ants is because ants are relatively new. Ants came about 100 million years ago. And so I put a ant bed here. And so if you see ants all over, including the screen, that's why. I thought that would be funny. Because I've done the same thing. I've walked through here and I'm going, are those ants? In fact, one's doing it right now. And it looks like it's on my screen rather than on the ground. Okay. There are also, so Mammalia, 165 years ago, you've got behind sumo, the tortoise that is here in, or unfortunately extinct, but in other places like the Galapagos, came about relatively recently and around the dinosaur days, and then hominids about 17 million years ago, and you've got placental mammals. Okay, just for kicks, if anybody remembers the biology, if it isn't a placental mammal, what are we talking about? Your ants have all passed away. Actually, I have an ant who's 92, marsupials, and what is another one? Ah, there we go, okay. Marsupials, but it is a platypus a marsupial. Monotremes, good for you. Okay, so in other words, there's monotremes, and there's marsupials, and they have very interesting characteristics, like that lay eggs. You know, in other words, characteristics that you would have of some of the other. Yeah, platypus is cool. Okay, and then so now what I'd like to do is in one of the things. Does anyone remember in Second Life the first time they walked underwater? Yeah, the extreme monotremes. I remember walking underwater the first time, and yeah, not anymore, but a long time ago, you know, like 2007 time period. I remember walking underwater and it was like, wow, that really feels strange. Yeah, you fell in. I did too. But what I would like you to do is all follow me back. I'm walking backwards. Follow me here. Myron's up ahead here. Stranger, Chantal. Go down right under. First of all, you can see the orcas there. By the way, I looked up orcas. Are orcas near the Mauritius? Yeah, it does feel odd. Say yes, because I looked it up. In other words, there are orcas there. I tend to think of them up near Alaska or someplace. But orcas are all over the place. So, yeah, I didn't know that either. So let's go ahead and walk down there right in front. The reason I'm walking down here is because this is a good place to start. I'm going to walk right off the bank here and follow me down here. Okay, and off the cliff. It's okay if you walk off the cliff because you should be able to hear me. Now, by the way, down here is the field trip today was going to be presented by our incredibly talented Linda Morris Kelly, PhD, or that you may know as Delia in Second Life. And she, in every one of the islands around here, and a lot of islands to the north of here, and all over the area, you will see works that she did. And she's very talented and very, like Max and others, very knows their subjects really well. And so they're accurate. And so what you have here is what you would find if you could do this around the Mauritius. You've got look at all these different kinds of corals and the tiny little zebra fishes here and the starfishes and things. It's really amazing what she's built. Now, this is only the first part of it because let's go down further. And there's a starfish. And so let's go down a little bit further here. Let me make sure I don't run into anybody. You can fall off the cliff. It's okay. Okay. Okay, so we'll start up here, and if Delia were here, she'd be able to explain it better. In fact, has anyone been on a field trip with Delia? Oh, yeah, Mike. In other words, we could literally do an entire field trip walking from Chem World down through Science Circle to STEM World, and then even beyond that, and be able to see all of what she's done. And I invite you to do that. In other words, just go under the water, and if you can, walk all the way down to Chem World and see what she's done down there. Walk over to STEM Island, and you will see what are called deep sea corals. There's a whole area of them over there with deep sea creatures and fumaroles and stuff. I mean, it's really quite something. I didn't know there even were deep sea corals. I thought they were all kind of tropical. Yeah. It's most cool, and the reason why I'm showing you this is because because she was going to give the trip. She's still going to give a trip sometime here, but she did show you all this. So in other words, you've got grasses. If you look at all the fishes, they're correct for this area. I see that even the Science Circle cat can hold its breath underwater. That's pretty cool, or breathe underwater. And then Chantal is on another type of coral here. And look at all these fishes and manta rays and that sort of thing. You may even see Nemo. Yeah, the Titanic tour. Yeah, somewhere in July. And then this huge. Hey, by the way, has anyone been in the ocean with the manta ray, like this one here that I'm following? Where did you go that you saw manta ray, Ewing? Mant times? I was in I'll tell you where I'm not sure where Mant times is, but I was, many times. Okay. I was in, where do people hide their money? What's the island in, the Caribbean? Also, here's a poisonous snake or something up here. In any case, it's the island in the Caribbean that I'm trying to remember what it is. Cayman Islands. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So anyway, in the Cayman Islands, they've got a little cove, and you can swim around in there with the manta rays. It's most cool, especially if you do any snorkeling. There's a little sandbar, and you can get right up to them and touch them. It's really cool. Yeah. And okay. So anyway, as we go further into here, you see snake here. You've got other corals. Now, what do we see ahead? This is a very rare sight down at the end here. Well, yeah. In other words, stingrays, mantas, you don't want to, or stingrays, you don't really want to touch their tail. That's where the barb is for sure. And that snake, you don't want to get anywhere near that snake. But you know, Second Life snakes are okay. Even a titanoboa. What do you see down there at the end? Chantal's near. That's a very okay. There you go. Actually, it's not an underwater waterfall. It's a underwater avalanche. It looks like a waterfall because that's probably what they use for the textures. But these actually exist. See this avalanche coming down here? I got my master's degree in Monterey, California. And Monterey has a very, very deep trench in the Monterey Bay. And they've got, yeah, there you go, SpongeBob. The brain coral. But these are underwater avalanches that form in very deep canyons, when the same way that snow forms avalanches in deep snow. And I thought this was very cool because you rarely get to see this, but in Second Life you get to see it. So I thought that was fun. Underwater hourglass? Not sure. Okay. So now, just for kicks, since we have a little more time, the first thing I want to do is, I've been chattering. No, actually, it doesn't. No more than an avalanche. It just kind of flows down, much like it looks like that. Now, I wouldn't be in front of it any more than I'd be in any other avalanche because I might get buried. But it won't form a tsunami because it does not. Okay, if anybody's a geologist or underwater person, what forms a tsunami? Yeah, there you go. In other words, normally a tsunami forms when you have the first thing that happens is you have a, that's right, Max, is you have a displacement of the land. There, perfect, along a fault. So, for example, the one that in, what was it, 2002? When was the one in Japan, the 9.0, the really serious one? I mean, they have a lot. I can remember the 2004 one. Off of Sumatra or off in Indonesia. Was it 2002? Okay, good gracious, long ago. Okay, but anyway, I thought the Japan one was more recent, but whatever. So what happens is you get a displacement, a large displacement along a fault, a transverse fault of the land, so that one goes down and the one comes up. And it makes the water rise in that area, and then, in other words, and then that wave, like a drum, then moves forward. So it's not a wind wave. It's actually a huge wave within the depths of the ocean itself that then, like a drum wave, push out. And then in shallow areas, like if you're at sea, big deal. Tsunamis are about like a less than a meter. Yeah. However, anyone live in Hawaii? I went to university there. Or anyone know about what there is off of Hawaii? Because Hawaii is definitely susceptible to tsunamis. The last one there that I know of, I was there in 1995. Yeah, it gets bigger when it approaches land because it shallows up. And then the energy of the wave rises. Because it still has the same energy and it makes it bigger. Any case, Hawaii, all the way out in the ocean in Hawaii, and well beyond it, thousands of miles beyond it, are buoys. Now these buoys actually, oh, excellent, okay. So the buoys actually can feel what the waves, and they can feel when the normal waves go up and down, and the duration of the wave. Yeah, now the big one, Sumo, that volcano that happened off of, where did it happen? It was a big volcanic eruption that caused a tsunami on one of the major islands there in the Pacific. I'm trying to remember, but it was also a major event. So volcanoes can do it, earthquakes can do it, all that good stuff like that. So these would be more like constantly flowing natural events sort of thing, but it doesn't displace land. Yeah. Ooh, there you go, Syzygy. Good. Yeah, okay. Okay, let me see. Okay, so now I've been, oh, thank you. Somebody took a picture. Thank you. I always like to take pictures of our group. In fact, I might just do it right now. Say cheese. Or say, what should you say if we're underwater? Blub, blub, blub. Okay. Yeah, we got 10 minutes, and let me just show you what I mean. Let me take a quick picture, perhaps. Where do you take pictures? There you go. Ah, okay. Now we got that picture. Good. Thank you. Okay, now let me just for kicks, when I tell you about Delia's other camembert, okay, when I tell you about Delia's other builds, why don't we do this? You can walk up the waterfall. This is kind of interesting. Walk up the waterfall, up here, come out on top here. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so now you see more corals. What do you see above us? Anybody happen to know? In fact, if you walk up here, what are you going to see? Yeah, you can walk up onto the land. Okay. Yeah, you're getting stuck in the Sumo's got stuck in the, and other people are getting stuck in the mangroves. You might have to walk slightly around them. But you got, yeah, orcas, mangroves, which are also very typical of the area. And if you've got your hiking shoes on, you can walk around the bend here. If you will follow me, and if you go into the water, big deal. Follow me around here. Okay, let me see in the go into the ocean here. I think this stuff. Yeah, there you go. Okay, if you go down in the water, you will see an enormous kelp forest. Now we have changed ecosystems slightly, because where do you see big kelp forests? Anybody? Kelp. Kelp's not quite the same as help. I hope I haven't lost anybody. Okay, I see enough names here. Where do you see kelp forests? Anybody? Coast of California, yeah. Attacked by cat. Cal. Okay. So yeah, in other words, I grew up off in oceans of, and you could see the kelp come ashore in, but that's a cold water environment. We're no longer in Mauritius. We're in a cold water environment, and you can see as you walk along here, look at what there is. I wanted to show you this because I don't want you to miss it. Okay, so everybody follow this way. You've got a big shark up there. You've got a great white, I think, up above you. And I don't want you to miss this, because this is also part of Delia's build. Over here where Sumo is, if you come over this way, I want to just show you, just so you don't miss. What are we looking at down here? What are these? You used to see back in, yeah, two big ones. I think they're a little bigger than, a representative from Mauritius in high school. Serious. Okay, that's cool. So huge tube worms and deep water fishes like this. Show you one of the marvelous builds that Delia did since we're down here, is if you'll go this direction, behind where Illing is and behind Op, I'm going to walk behind you. You're going to lose me again unless you follow me. So Yes, that is a region boundary. You also will notice that the sky or the it changed, so you might want to change your environment to midday because it's darker here, at least in my book. You briefly lost your hair. Okay. Look at this. These are deep water, deep water. Except you can see the light coming down from above. It's quite interesting to me. It's quite a marvelous build, and you can see these big waving fronds here, and the schools of fishes, and then down below, if anyone missed it, there are black fumaroles and tube worms and whoops, sorry. It is gorgeous. I agree, Max. And so I didn't want to. I would be amiss without showing you what there is. If you walk down this way, it is quite extraordinary, and it's even beyond what now. Delia wanted to be accurate to what there was in Mauritius, but as everyone knows, or as you might know, the life actually in cold water, there's more life in cold water than there is in warm water. You might not have known that, but what you see here is a very deep water, cold water environment that you might see in the Arctic Ocean. And there's a big whale with a huge wrestling, huge squid. You've got palm fronds. You've got this is a spectacular build which Delia did off of in the northern part of Stem Island. In other words, this is what you would see in the oceans of the Arctic Ocean, literally. And you've got jellyfish. Suma's about to get zapped by a luminescent jellyfish. Yeah, you do, and I don't want to take away from Delia because she's given tours here before, and they're well worth her interpretation, not just my interpretation. But I would highly encourage you to go on a tour with her. Like if you haven't seen the Titanoboa one, that's absolutely spectacular. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I'd like to wrap up at the hour. Does anyone have any questions, comments, etc., etc.? You're, of course, welcome to come back to any of these places again. Well, there may not be corals in the Arctic. I'd have to look it up. But there are what are called, look up deep water corals. In other words, deep water corals. You might not have thought of there being corals in the deep sea. Okay, so Delia Lake. If you look up, in other words, you grab any one of these, right-click, edit, you will see her name on it, Delia Lake. Okay? They're hers. Yes, and Mike, that's I wanted, because most people don't see what's underwater. And this is, there's at least as much underwater on these islands as there is above water. I mean, it's quite spectacular. So don't miss the Titanoboa field trip later this summer, and other field trips we have coming up. Okay, so I'm going to conclude the field trip here. If anybody has any comments, and my dog's barking. No, actually, it is Thai. Let me write down what it is. Titanoboa. Titanoboa was an enormous snake that lived long ago. And you can find it if you get lost in the Titanoboa region, which is near between Chemistry World and the auditorium. You may get swallowed by a snake. But I don't want to spoil Delia's trip. I just wanted to tell you that how much I admire what she has built. Yeah, well, that's right. In other words, just like I mentioned with Darwin, it was not Darwin's idea. It's just that he was one of the names on the idea of evolution and natural selection and stuff. There were several people that Feed me. We need a big plant. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. My dog's barking. I got to go see what he's barking at. Snake. Why did it have to be a snake? I knew. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm glad there's quite a group here. Good gracious, there's a lot of people here. Okay, and thank you very much. Please join us for other events that we have and for other field trips. Enjoy the weekend. Oh, good. Great tour experience. Thank you. Good. Lots of fun.